Okay, it's 8:35. I think we should start. A reminder, this webinar is being recorded. So if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat. You can put them in the YouTube live stream as well if you like. Whichever way works for you. If you do not want to be recorded, hold your questions till the end and I can answer them after we finish the recording. Okay, so this week we are talking about the actual specifics of the technologies you can use to make your technology usage safer, okay? There are three general areas that we will be covering, and each area will be in a separate session because this is the most detailed nitty-gritty, and even with this, I'm gonna have to be fairly general unless I get specific questions. Okay, so there are, in this session, we will be covering three general areas that are related to each other. One is the parental controls. Secondly, tracking of what is happening. And thirdly is house and personal rules, okay? So I'm gonna start with the house and personal rules because that is partially technology and that's partially just simply what you do and how you do this. Now, the essential thing, again, you know, as we've discussed in all the other sessions, is that you need to be thinking about how you're using this technology, why you're using it, why are you doing this? Why do you have a computer? Why do you have internet access? Why do you have a smartphone? Why do you not have a smartphone? Whatever. You need to be very, very mindful about this. And once you do that, you can say, okay, so what am I going to do with this? And what am I not going to do with this? What types of things will I do? What are ways to make sure that I don't overuse it, that I don't use it inappropriately? And one thing to do is simply set house rules. So, you know, these are the kinds of sites that I will visit, etc. One common thing that happens, people do for themselves, especially for your kids, is how many hours a day do you use the computer? Now, you have to be realistic about that because, you know, if you say, okay, I'm going to say 2 hours a day of computer use, well, what do you use your computer for? If the majority of your work is computer-based, and saying 2 hours on the computer makes no sense. Or you might, for instance, say 2 hours of online time because most of my work is computer-based, but I don't need to be online. So you could say that. If you have separate accounts for each of your kids, you could say each child gets 1 hour, or your oldest child who is in high school and needs to do more work gets 2 hours, etc. So these are the things you need to think through, okay? But you have to set those things up. And what's really, there are now ways, depending on what you're using, to enforce some of those rules using filters and parental controls, etc. Okay. And again, also tracking can be used to make sure that those rules are being followed. So that's the first thing. You have to decide what your rules are for yourself, for the family as a whole, for your children. Okay. And then you need to get the technology that will enable you to enforce those rules. Okay, so there are, on a high level, the two things that you are looking at are your parental control software and your tracking. Okay, so tracking software generally can come in two flavors. It can be with just tracking itself, or it can be part of a parental or filtering solution. Sometimes, again, filtering comes by itself, or it comes as part of a larger parental controls package. But it is a thing in and of itself, even though it generally comes in a parental controls package. And there are a few things that are really, really important about tracking software. So the first thing that's really important is do not ever do tracking of your children or anybody else in secret. It's just not a good idea, and it actually and it's counterproductive. Okay, because the point of tracking is not to catch your child doing something wrong or saying, I got you, and this is what's going on or whatever. That's not the point of tracking. The point of tracking is to keep an eye on your child, but also as a preventative measure. Like if you talk to security people, right, they will often tell you to put dummy cameras up. You should have real cameras, but you should also, if you cannot put enough cameras out, put up dummy cameras in very visible spots. Why? Because it scares people off. In other words, the kind of person who's going to break into your house may not break in if they know that you have cameras and they might get caught, because that's the way they operate. They're trying not to get caught, right? And obviously your spouse, your child, yourself, if somebody else is looking at tracking stuff, you shouldn't be not looking at things because somebody's going to catch you. But at the end of the day, human nature is human nature, and we should use it to our benefit. We should use it to their benefit. And, and we know very often people, they will give into their Yetzer Hara, and what will keep them from getting into the Yetzer Hara is that they know that you might be looking. And ultimately, it's a lot more useful for your child not to go to this bad place than for them to go to that bad place and then you find out about it and have to deal with it. So that's one reason to not do that. Another reason, though, and one of the things that makes it counterproductive is that it's a bad example. It destroys trust. Even if you have a legitimate reason to do this, the reality is that once your child finds out that you were doing this without telling them, they're not going to trust you. And yes, there are unfortunately cases where that's the price you have to pay, but it's a high price and it's not something you should do lightly. Okay. To the point where I say, like, it's almost never, acceptable. The other thing is that it's a bad example. One of the ways you teach children about boundaries and about tznius, and I don't mean tznius the way you dress, but those boundaries of matoivo alachiak, that you don't look into somebody else's kitchen, you don't look into somebody else's windows, etc. You don't snoop on people, is by behaving that way in your own life. And that includes your children. Your children are not extensions of you, especially once they're like beyond 7 or 8 years old. They are individual people, and there's a certain the way for them to learn about respecting your other people's privacy and their own privacy, that you want your children to learn not to overshare, is by helping them create those boundaries and respecting those boundaries. Also, on a halach basis, the consensus opinion is that the Gershon of not reading other people's mail applies to your children. Now, obviously, there are exceptions, which you have to talk to Rav about, etc. But again, if you're in that kind of exceptional situation, you need a lot more help than I can give you in these webinars. But if you haven't hit that point, this is a huge overstep. Now, again, some people are going to tell me that it may not apply, that the Chalav term doesn't apply to email, so it doesn't apply to adults' email, it doesn't apply to child's email, etc. I'm not going to get into that. But my point here is the concept that even a child, especially one over bar mitzvahs, but even one who's under that, should not have their mail read, right? It's by the same token, you shouldn't be snooping on them. Okay. Now, again, there are times when that is necessary, but it's very, very easy to convince yourself it's necessary when it really isn't. Listen, I'm a parent, and I understand the elemental fear that parents have, you worry because there's a lot. It's very scary, and you hear all these terrible stories and whatever. But snooping on your child is generally not the way. And if you really are convinced that there is something that requires this, then you do absolutely talk to a talk to a counselor, because you know what? If you're right, the counselor, the Rav will support you. If they don't, then you need to take a step back. And if you're right, then you need the support that the Rav and the counselor can give you. So tracking is a good thing, but it's only a good thing 99% of the time. It's only a good thing if your kids know you're doing this. Okay. It's also only a good thing when it's not the whole story. Okay. And by the way, a really good idea here is that not only do you track, say, your children, but like there's a history, say, of my usage that my husband can see, and I can see a history of my husband's usage, right? There are many people, there's actually a service called Guard Your, I believe it's called Guard Your Eyes, where this is, people who have no special problems, they subscribe, and there's a buddy, could be a chavrusa, a family member, whatever, who gets weekly reports of where people are going. Again, the idea here being that for a lot of people, when the Yetzer Hara comes knocking, and the thing that helps them not give in to the Yetzer Hara is knowing that somebody is going to see that report once a week, right? So when you're talking to your kids about that, you can do the same thing, right? You can say, okay, I'm doing the tracking on you, and I'm also doing it on myself, because this is just the way we're all made. It's not because I think you're bad or you're going to try to sneak around me or whatever. It's not that I don't trust you. It's just that we all have the Yetzer Hara, and it says in apotropos l'rayos. So this is something we do for all of us. We don't just do for you. We do this as a general thing, to make it easier to make it easier for the Yetzer Hara, to fight the Yetzer Hara. And also, if something does slip through the cracks, it's better to know sooner rather than later so that we can address the issue. So that's the approach that tracking really needs to have. It can be extremely useful. There are some very good products out there. Again, I strongly recommend using something that's part of a larger package, because you don't want tracking to be the only thing you're doing. And from a technology point of view, when it's part of a bigger package, you're less likely to have conflicts between this thing and that thing, especially since you don't want somebody to be able to easily uninstall the tracking and easily uninstall the parental controls, etc. So if you have it as part of one package, there's somebody who's basically spent the time and energy to make sure everything works together. And this goes back to a point I've made before, that you're going to have to pay for this. Generally speaking, this does cost money. I'm not talking about huge amounts of money, but it is money. And the reason, again, is because there are technical complexities. And if you want this to work smoothly and not get in your way and do what it's supposed to do, but not more, right? If you want the tracking to happen, but you don't want every Chaim Yankel to be able to just get onto the tracking company's site and see everybody's histories, right? Just as an example, etc. These are all excuse me, I still have a little bit of tonsillitis. These are all issues. So you need to be working with companies that can and do invest the resources to make sure this stuff works right. And for them to invest the resources, at least part of their financing has to come from the people who use it and who pay for it. I remember a number of years ago, TAG used to use free products, and they used to do their work for free, etc. And with time, they had to start charging, and they stopped using free products. And I remember there was a lot of pushback, and people were really upset, and this product, that product. And they basically, this is what they said also. They were like, it's all good and fine, but if you want a product that works well, right? They were talking more parental controls, but it's part of the same package. If you want a product that works well, doesn't cause other problems and doesn't expose you in different ways, which K9 was. At that point, K9 was a product that did some good things, but even when it worked properly, created other exposures because they were free and they were not investing the resources to make a really good product. So they started using other products. And all of them, even the least good of the products that they use now, are better than the best K9 ever was. Okay. And of the products that that TAG, at least in Brooklyn, uses, I would say the most expensive product is the one that works the best. It works with the most situations, and they're the most, responsive and flexible, etc. But it's also the one you pay the most for. So there's a lot of truth in this field. There's a lot of truth to you get what you pay for. Now there are certain of the things I'm going to talk about in the next two sessions are free. But remember, those are layers on top of this fundamental layer of good parental controls are your basic minimum. Now, Windows, both Windows and the Mac, and Android, they all have some built-in parental controls. And if you really, really know what you're doing and you're willing to take the time, you can do a lot with those controls. But you have to know what you're doing and you have to make the effort. And it's really easy to not do so well with it. And and if you have problems, there's really nobody to talk to. There's no real support for it. That you can get some support, but there's not a lot of support. It's online. You have to wait till they get back to you, etc. It's something I really, really don't recommend. I have the technical know-how, and I still do not depend on the built-in Android and Windows tools. That's the point at which there are some. I do know some people who do use those built-in tools, and they're fine. But these are people who have a high level of knowledge and a high level of patience and detailedness to be able to do this and make it work for them. So my recommendation is go ahead and get the products. So what are parental controls? Okay, so parental controls let you do three things. Okay, one thing that it doesn't let you do is filter internet. Okay. That's a separate class of product. Again, it often comes in a package with the parental control package, which again, it makes sense because there's a lot of overlap there. But what parental controls are, for those of you who are familiar with mobile device management or device management in a work context, this is a very similar idea where the parent gets to set what the children can do. The only thing is they're called parental controls, but people use them for themselves and for their family members who are not children and who are not, I have parental controls on every device in my house, my computer, my cell phone, my husband's computer, my husband's cell phone, my children, they're all adults now. Some have their own. I do the parental controls for some of my kids, some of my kids do their own. Whichever one, if you want me to do it for you as a favor, I'll do it for you. If you want to do it yourself, do it yourself. But every adult should be using something like parental controls for themselves as well. Again, because basically, what is the parental controls? It's a program that says, okay, you give me a list of rules. Remember I mentioned the house rules? And I will enforce those rules, right? So the rules can be depending on the package. The rules can be which products can be used, when can you use your phone, when can you use your computer, how many hours a day. Now, different products have different levels of granularity. So for instance, the product I happen to use allows me to give a number of hours per day that each person can use their computer. And I can also say, and this is the schedule. So they can only, so say when my kids were younger, I would say they can only use the computer X hours a day. From 5 o'clock, which was after they came home from school, till 9 o'clock, which is when a half an hour before they needed to start getting ready for bed. So they shouldn't be using the computer right before bed. But I wasn't allowing them to use the computer for 4 hours a night. I was allowing them to use for like 2 hours a night. But the 2 hours could be anywhere in this time frame. Okay. So Norton allows you to do that. Norton allows you to do something like that on your Android phone as well. It does not work for iPhones, by the way. A different parental controls package, which I've used for Android. And again, these are not the only two, but these are just two examples. A package called NetSpark. So that it gives you those things, and it also allows you to separately turn off all of the smartphone features, but schedule the actual use of the phone itself on a smartphone, just the phone features separately. So you can say the phone can be used, from 9 in the morning until 10 at night, but the smartphone features can only be used from 5 in the evening till 9 at night or whatever, just to use an example of how you can do this. So one of the things you should look at when you decide which parental controls package to use is how granular is it, and does it allow you to do the things you need to do. Now, for me, the separating out smartphone versus the smart features of the smartphone versus the phone is a non-issue. So for me, that functionality doesn't matter. But being able to both limit the amount of hours and schedule separately is extremely useful, because it gives a lot more flexibility, and with how much time, because I wanted the kids to be able to be flexible about when they use the computer, especially since it was a shared computer. So this one used it earlier, that one used it later, etc. But at the same time, I did want to make sure that nobody was using the computer at 12 at night or something like that, right? So giving them a wider amount of time frame to use it in, but limiting how much time they could use the computer, worked very, very well for them. Now, for myself, that's a non-issue. Time frame is not an issue. If you have somebody with a usage problem and you want to make sure that they, don't try to start using the computer before Shabbos ends, whatever, that those things can be helpful. But again, if you have that problem, you also need more help than this webinar series. But it can be, along with the guidance of really competent professionals, a tool like that can be useful, just by the way. But that's the idea. Basically, what you want to do is you want to use this program. And why does it work why do parental controls work for me, even though I am the one who is managing the parental controls? And this is what I was talking about earlier, about the idea of friction last week, right? That, say I decide I want to get this app on my phone, and it's really not a good idea, right? I read about it, it sounds so wonderful, whatever. So now, in order to get it on my phone, I have to go to the parental control software, log in with a special password that's separate from my other passwords, and go and tell the parental control software that I am going to allow myself to install this app on my phone. Okay. That break is something that 9 times out of 10 will give somebody a chance to stop and think about, do I really want to do this? Okay. Now, if you know yourself and you know that that's not enough, get somebody else to manage your parental controls for you. And this is where a service like this is, by the way, one of the places where a service like Tag can be useful. Even if you have the know-how and you're fine, whatever. Sometimes knowing that you need to call, say, Tag. Now, ultimately, they will do what they want, but they will, kind of talk you down if you've told them why you're doing this. Like, they'll kind of try to talk you down, which can be helpful, right? But the point here is that it gives you a chance to step back and stop and think and say, is this really, really what I want to do, what I need to be doing? Okay. And that's really very, very important, because stopping yourself from doing this thing, it's something that's really, it looks interesting, etc. But, sometimes you just really don't want to. Sometimes you realize that, maybe this is not such a great idea. Okay. And that's enough. And again, you could be the one doing it, or your spouse can be the one doing it, whatever, it doesn't matter. I do want to tell you something very, very important. In general, with all of these things, with the parental controls, with the other stuff that I'm going to mention later, you are always going to have people who are going to tell you that if you use it, you're not going to be able to do your job. And I am here to tell you that this is not true. Now, it is true that certain products will not work with certain types of work. Okay, that is true. Like, for instance, I was just talking to somebody today who basically, they were encouraging her to go to tag and talking about the way they work. And she's like, I cannot do this because the kind of work she does requires a lot of camera footage of people who aren't not necessarily, dressed the way they should, because it's camera footage of people on the streets. Okay. And the filter that was being recommended, one of the things it does is it automatically blocks images based on skin tones, the presence of skin tones, which, okay, so that's not going to work for that particular person, obviously. Okay. But that doesn't mean that you can't use any filters. It means that she cannot use that set of filters. She needs a different set of filters that doesn't block all images, and it doesn't block images just on the basis of, skin tones or whatever, right? So that's the kind of thing that you have to know what you're working with, right? So, again, so this is what you need to really, it's very, and I bring it up because this is something that comes up all the time. Okay. And it happens a lot. You'll hear this, kids have come to their parents who say, oh, I don't really know so much about technology. And the kids take advantage of their parents' confessed lack of knowledge of technology and say, oh, well, I'm not going to be able to do my projects with my classmates if you use a filter, if you use parental controls, and how do you know? So I'm going to tell you, no, that's not true. Now, obviously, if you use the wrong filter or if you put the wrong parental controls in place, yes. I mean, there is one parental controls package that I will not recommend to anybody, because basically their thing is they have a list like of 20, 30 apps and 100 sites that they allow. And if you want anything else, you've got to go through this whole process to let it through. And that really does not work I don't know anybody who uses their computer seriously. I'm not talking about just for games, for whom this would work. There are just too many sites that are used for too many different types of works that are not on that list, that there's just too much of, too many hoops to go through for this to be viable. Okay. So that's fine. So it is true that that particular filter won't work for most people. There are people who it works for, and if it works for you, that's fine. But you have to understand that just because this filter or this application, this implementation of parental controls will not work for you doesn't mean that you can't use parental controls. It means that this program won't work, or maybe this program will work, but you need to work with somebody who can help you set it up in a way that works for you. Okay, so that's the really, like I said, that's two of the three baseline items that every parent should have when in their arsenal when dealing with computers and smartphones for themselves and their kids, are parental controls and the tracking software. Again, the tracking software is actually less important, but it is something to seriously consider, implement it or not. But also, if you're going to implement it, it should be sending you reports or making it easy for you to see the reports, look at them, use them. Please do not do this behind your child's back. Do not, act as though your child, again, if there is a real reason for this, you should be asking your Rova Shaila, you should be talking to a therapist. If you don't want to talk to your Rova therapist, then either it's not bad enough or you're not being a very responsible parent, because you cannot use tracking instead of talking to the support and the guidance, the advisors you need to. Okay. But again, I'm hoping that most of the audience who is seeing is not in that position. This is hopefully to help avoid that kind of situation. And if you want to maintain an open dialogue with your kids, not doing this behind your kid's back is a very, very important tool. And I will venture to say that one of the most important things that you can do to help keep your kids safe aside from the technical, one of the most important non-technical things you can do is keeping an open dialogue. If your kid knows that they can trust you and they can come to you no matter what, and you will help them dig themselves out, as long as they're willing to do the work, obviously, right? But you will be willing to help them. That is worth everything. That is worth everything. So that's it. These are simple concepts. They're actually very finicky technology items. The well-known ones are actually quite easy to implement if you think through what you're trying to do. But those are the ones that you have to pay for because somebody's gone through the time and trouble to make them easy and keep them easy to use, which sounds funny, but there are constant updates, there are constant changes, there are constant threats that change the landscape that mean that the people who make these products need to keep on tweaking them. So that is what I have to say. Any questions? Does anyone have any questions? Okay, anything in the chat? No, I do not see anything in the chat. Okay, so I hope this has been helpful. Emir Tashem, next week, same time at 8:30, will be the next session on technology specifics, and I will be discussing the third piece in the arsenal, which is filtering. And that is really the primary thing I will be talking about. I will also be talking about antivirus and other anti-bad things. But that's what we'll be talking about next week. And the reason I'm doing that separately is because filtering is a whole beast of its own. And there are different types of filtering of different aspects of your work. And filters and antivirus tend to be very, very closely together. Also, spam, which you want to be filtering for, is a very big vehicle for viruses, etc. So I will get into more detail on that next week. But now, if anybody wants any specific recommendations, feel free to reach out to me. You can put comments on the Yahoo live stream. You can email me at keza.zajac@gmail.com. Or those of you who have my WhatsApp number can send me a WhatsApp. I will be very happy to answer questions. However, if you do have specifics, please tell me what you are looking for. I need to know what the device is, who has that device, and I don't mean the name, but I mean, is it a child, is it an adult, what are they using it for? So it's an iPhone for a high school student. It's a Windows computer for myself, and I need it for work, whatever, that kind of overall. And if it's a Windows computer, what version of Windows, that kind of thing. So I just need a general overall idea of what you're looking for so I can give you some reasonable and realistic advice going forward. Okay, so that is it. Have a wonderful evening. So recording is stopped. If anybody has a question. Nope. Okay. Have a great night.